95% of the people visiting Glacier Bay National Park come by cruise ship. The other 5% actually land in the closest town to Glacier Bay, Gustavus, and stay for varying lengths of time. Some of these people do sport fishing, some do private tours, some have their own private boats, and others simply go camping and hiking throughout the park. When I had my cruise in May of 2019, I knew what an iceberg was, and I knew that a glacier was a big block of ice, but that's about it. And like most passengers on the cruise ships, we get into Glacier Bay National Park, we look at the beautiful mountains and the snow and some of the glaciers, we get a few pictures, and that's it. When we get home, we sit down, look at our pictures, and realize, as we read more about the park, that we missed a whole lot, and that our experience was compromised because we didn't know really what we were looking at. So it's the purpose of this video to familiarize you with the Glacier Bay National Park so that when you do your cruise, you will have some essential background data available and know something about the park and be able to enjoy it at a much higher level. And of course, you'll be able to get those fantastic photos and videos because you know what to expect. Before you is a map of the Glacier Bay National Park provided by the National Park Service. The red line that you see in that map is the route that the cruise ships take as they make their way through the Glacier Bay. As you can see, the red line starts right at the mouth of Glacier Bay at Icy Straits. Then it moves in the center of the bay where the depth is greatest on the way up to its furthest point at the Grand Pacific Glacier. Then the ships make a 180-degree turn very slowly so that everyone on board has an opportunity to look for calving of the glacier called the Marjorie Glacier. After everyone is satisfied and many photos are taken, the ship then slowly makes its way back down the Tar Inlet and then around the bend, as you see here in the map, and up the Johns Hopkins Inlet to another interesting glacier called the Lamplugh Glacier. On the way, one passes the wide expanse of the Reed Glacier. The goal here is to see what was a very active Johns Hopkins Glacier. However, as you'll see later, the recession of many of these glaciers is tremendous, and just in the period of 2 years, the Johns Hopkins has basically receded much further up the valley, as has the Grand Pacific Glacier. After that point, most of the glacier activity is completed, and the ship leaves the Johns Hopkins Inlet and heads back through the main portion of Glacier Bay and returns to its mouth at Icy Straits. During the course of the 6 to 7 hours of exploring this natural wonder, the ship would have covered over 130 miles, as the distance from the entrance to the park to the Grand Pacific Glacier is approximately 65 miles. Along the way, when you're not looking at glaciers, you have ample opportunity to search for and photograph the abundant wildlife that inhabits this area. On cruise ships, the night before entering Glacier Bay National Park, you will receive, along with the daily newsletter, the Park Service brochure describing points of interest in the park. This brochure also has a map that you can use to follow the pathway up the Glacier Bay to its end at the Tar Inlet. If you keep this handy with you when you're on deck, you'll be able to know pretty much exactly where you are at all times, and this will facilitate your experience in the park in terms of getting photographs and videos. People often ask, what's the best side of the ship to be on to see the glaciers? And as one of the park rangers said in the past, first select a good viewing point, and then the best side of the ship to be on is the outside of the ship. The reason being, the ship goes all the way up to the end of the bay and then does a 180-degree turn. Therefore, if you're on the starboard side of the ship, which is the right side, you will see everything going up on the right side, but then after the 180-degree turn, you will see everything that you missed from the left side of the ship on the way back down the bay. Starting at the Icy Strait, the ship will pass between Point Carolus on the left and Point Gustavus on the right to enter the Sadakaday Narrows. Then, when the ship reaches this point, it will slow down to allow the park rangers to board the ship with their equipment, where they will give an interpretive program in the ship's theater, as well as set up an impromptu visitor center on deck, and other rangers will stroll around the decks to answer any of your questions. All ships have park rangers on board.
It leaves about 30 minutes before we meet the ship out in the middle of Glacier Bay. Now, on board this boat, we all wear float coats and helmets, as you can see here. And when we get out to meet the ship in the middle of the bay, the ship doesn't stop. It keeps moving, okay? Which means our boat has to pull up right alongside and keep moving as well. And so once we get up alongside the port side of the ship, there's the approach. That's what the approach looks like from our view, okay? We climb these rope ladders, much smaller than I envisioned before I got here. No less scary, though, I assure you. And it's a very controlled operation. It's very safe, but really, it's one of the most interesting commutes in the National Park Service, no doubt, if not the most beautiful, right? It's very interesting. So if you missed that this morning, did anybody see that happen, by the way? Okay, a few people. It's happening again at about 7 o'clock, where we'll be getting off onto this rock, and you can watch it take us away into the wilderness. So hang around for that. Port side of the ship, 7 o'clock, if you want to watch that. Yep.
The next landmark to look out for is South Marble Island. The stellar sea lions like to sunbathe or sleep on the rocks on either end and in the middle of this island, and this represents a fantastic photo opportunity. After passing South Marble Island, look ahead and slightly to the right for Tlingit Point. Tlingit Point will serve as a benchmark for even looking further to the right for Muir Point. The importance of seeing Muir Point is that you will be looking at the site where John Muir set up his camp right next to what later became the Muir Glacier. In 1879, the Muir Glacier extended as far down into the bay as that blue line marked 1892. Muir often mentioned that when he was trying to sleep, he was kept awake all night by the constant, loud, cannon shot-like sound of the calving glacier. Moving on, try to recognize the mouth of the tidal inlet, because that will set you up to also see the Gloomy Knob, which is a good place to pull out those binoculars and look for signs of bear, sheep, and other wildlife near the shore or up on the rocky ridges. The next point of interest is the Composite Island, or Composite Island, which sits basically in the middle of two inlets, the Queen Inlet and the Rendu Inlet. Of course, both of these were glaciers that were descending as tributaries to the Grand Pacific Glacier when it extended down this far. Again, this will serve as a benchmark as to where you are on your voyage up Glacier Bay. The next important landmark is that of Russell Island. In 1879, when John Muir was exploring Glacier Bay, this is as far as he could get. Because if you look at that 1880 line, that was the only part of Russell Island that was land. Everything above that was solid glacier ice. Because of this, John Muir never saw much above that, such as the Marjorie Glacier and the Johns Hopkins Inlet. He did, however, explore a part of the Reed Glacier over to the left, but it was full of ice and he really couldn't get very close to it. The other important thing about Russell Island is that it serves as the dividing point between the Tar Inlet and the Johns Hopkins Inlet. And both of these arms of Glacier Bay are approached by your cruise ship. Just before reaching the southern tip of Russell Island, if you look just behind it, you will see a wonderful, classic glacial valley that does not have a name. And if you look up the side of the mountain, you will see Mount Abdallah. This is definitely a photo opportunity. The ship will then proceed up the Tar Inlet to the mouth of the Grand Pacific Glacier. This was supposed to be one of the highlights of exploring Glacier Bay. However, up to 2 years ago, there was ice right down to the mouth of the glacier. However, now all that's left is the rocky remnants or moraine that the glacier has left as it's receded up the valley. So much so that now the point of focus is the Marjorie Glacier over to the left. The ship will enter that area and do a very slow 180-degree turn, so that going into Tar Inlet, those on the left side of the ship will have full view of the glacier, and as the turn is made, those on the right side of the ship will have an equal opportunity to see large and small segments of ice calve off of the Marjorie Glacier. So the Marjorie Glacier is now the star of going up the Tar Inlet.
I was just thinking. Oh, there it goes. That's a good one. Wow.
There's a
Just for us.
Oh, wow.
Definitely couldn't miss that one.
got it.
That was a big one.
Yeah. Right on cue.
It like goes in slow-mo. It was.
On the waves that come through.
Yeah, that's what I can't wait to see how far it rippled out.
Look at that. Some of you guys. There goes more on the right there.
In the Horizon Court, it will be closing in about an hour. And at 1:30, I would like to remind you that Mary Lou will be giving her program, Sweet Peace, and that will be in the Princess Theater at 1:30, deck 7 forward. So I hope you'll join her for that. You do not want to miss this program.
After that point, which is about an hour and a half, the ship will then proceed down the Tar Inlet and then around this point and up into the Johns Hopkins Inlet. The star of the Johns Hopkins Inlet is not the Johns Hopkins Glacier because it has met the same fate as the Grand Pacific Glacier, in that it has receded up the valley and all that remains is the rocky deposits that glaciers leave as they recede. So the ship spends more time allowing the passengers to view and photograph the Lamplugh Glacier. At this point, the ship proceeds out of the Johns Hopkins Inlet, past the Reed Glacier, and then returns to the main portion of Glacier Bay, going past the Gilbert Peninsula and on to Drake Island, then Willoughby Island, and finally to the disembarkation point of the National Park Rangers. After that, the cruise ship proceeds out of the park and re-enters Icy Strait. At that point, the northbound ships head towards the Hubbard Glacier, and the southbound ships head towards Skagway.